Okay, so I will start introducing and presenting the speaker. So this roundtable is about the challenges of the US most favored nation policy. We'll detail a bit more about this policy and the consequences on pharmaceutical innovation and pricing. So I will start the presentation in order of sitting and of speaking with Pedro Pita Barros, who is a professor of economics at Nova School of Business in Lisbon. Virginie Beaumeunier, who is the president of CEPS, which is a French Economic Committee of Health Products, which is fixing prices in France for prescription drugs and reimbursement rates. Catherine Raynaud, who is the head of international policy and communication of Pfizer France. Nicolas Schlumberger, who is the head of market access at Sanofi France. Moritz, Suppliet, who is an economist and who is working at the DG SANTE at the European Commission. And Jean Tirole, who everybody knows, I guess, from Toulouse School of Economics. So maybe before we start with Pedro, who's going to remind us the economics of MFN and a little bit about what is this policy. Just wanted to mention this policy is something in discussion since maybe 15 years in the US. So that's not something new with the recent decision of the administration. It was already in the Inflation Reduction Act, and it was even before in many discussions. So that's something which is a long-term trend, I think. So that's not a new policy, and it's probably going to last. So it's important to study and understand the impact of such policies. That's why we decided to have this roundtable today. And so we are going to start with Pedro, who is going to present us from an academic point of view what we can say a little bit about this policy.
Okay, good afternoon, and thanks for this quick introduction. I think the key point in here part is seeing that it's a policy that has been there, as we are saying, for a long time on the making, and then suddenly you got a speed track for it in the last year with the MFN policy. One important thing is to think about what is actually trying to do, what is a long-term trend of what it tends to do, and what is the operational parts that is taking care now, and then what can we say from economics, from the European experience on some of the parts of it. So the most important point that we have associated with MFN, with this policy, is that you select a set of countries and then you use it as a reference point to setting prices internally. This has been known in Europe for a long time with the name of external reference pricing. And so in a sense, it's not new on it. What it's become new on this part is that the sheer size of the United States in doing it, which makes it totally different. And then you can single out particular part of the policy itself, because it uses only a handful of countries. So it has the G5, the 5 countries of a G6, plus Switzerland and Denmark as the benchmarks, but it all is going to use the second lowest price. So it's not the average of the prices, it's just the second lowest, which means that for each product it can be a different product. We don't know exactly what's going to be there. Now, there's going to be also things like they want to use net prices, not the list prices. So the price announced by the companies can be very different from the effective prices. And the way they're going to find the net prices is that they're going to ask the companies to report on the net prices. And this is going to be important given the experience that we observe in Europe with this sort of problems for a long time. Now, what's going to be the kind of effects that you could expect in the short run, medium and long run term? So the first thing is the driving force for this is the prices are much higher in the United States than elsewhere. And so the trend to lower these prices in the United States is going to be there. It's a long-term trend for sure. And compensation for it will be to try to raise the prices elsewhere. And that's the kind of economic effect that we're going to expect to see. In a sense, we are start to seeing it a bit. So the lowering of prices in the United States, it's unclear what it is because it's been set in confidential agreements or non-public agreements between the government of the United States and companies. But we see the pressures in European countries to raise the prices. And we see in the UK already some agreements, even at the government level, to put mechanisms that actually will have higher prices in the future and more products in the future. That's a short-term part, convergence of prices in some way. The second part is what happens to the launching of new products. And for that, we know that there are going to be launch delays. And some products may not even be launched in some of the countries at some point. And that seems to also be occurring already. We see some reports, public reports from the companies, the data companies that show that the delays are increasing in Europe in response in the last year compared to the previous period, the previous year. So we see this happening in somehow. What will be the strategic sequencing of delays these launchings is uncertain. It's going to be always first in the US. It's going to be in some countries. They will not launch in some countries at all because those countries will be used for reference in countries that are referenced to the United States. So it could be a cascade of effects that you may have on this. So launching delays will be part of this story. And then we have the long run part, which is the investment on R&D. And most of the discussions on investment R&D are focused on, are we going to generate the same sort of revenues that allows firms to invest? And some of the computations in the United States, even prior to this MFN policy, were looking on that. How much we need to raise in the US, how much we need to raise in OECD countries to lower in the US to keep overall profits constant. But I also would like to argue that's going to be a change in the type of R&D that's going to be done. And the reason is that one thing that is long-term with this policy as well is that if United States use European prices as reference, they are going to import HTA, health technology assessment, cost effectiveness analysis into the prices. And which means that R&D will going to be directed to those products and populations that have a high ratio for this, high effectiveness, because those will command a higher price that will be imported to the United States. So the type of R&D through clinical trials is going to probably change as well, not just the overall part. So you may having kind of more hidden effects through which populations are covered, which products are researched on this part. And so this gives a kind of short run, medium run, and long run effects of this MFN policy. Last layer, which I'm not going to elaborate, is how this interacts with industrial policy, which is also part of this MFN idea at this point in the United States. But that will take longer, and I leave it for the last part of the discussion. So thank you. I got the 5 minutes.
Thank you, Pedro. That's perfect. Thanks a lot. That's very, very interesting. So to see this short-term, medium-term, long-term impact, and indeed, industrial policy is going to be important. But maybe we'll keep this for the discussion, and maybe Jean will have things to say on this at the end, as he has worked on this a lot. I think it's important to look from a European perspective also, what is the consequences of this. And of course, the position is not easy for the French authorities. And Virginie Beaumeunier, who is the head of this French CEPS, the Economic Committee for Health Products, has worked last year on trying to, for the government, trying to understand the impact and see what could be the next policy decisions. I don't know. And so maybe, Virginie, you can talk to us about what you're thinking about all this and what you did in your Mission Flash last year.
Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much for the invitation. So effectively, last year I was entrusted with the Flash task to formulate proposals for modernizing drug policy on price setting and expenditure control. Of course, we took into account the geopolitical context. But I must insist on that. We don't want a French policy driven by MFN policy or driven by Donald Trump's policy, but of course we have to take this into account. The aim of the task was to find a balance between attractiveness for pharmaceutical firms and for patients also, but also cost control, as the social security budget in France. Social security budget deficit in France is huge, as you probably know. And so what could be the answer? What could be the proposals? I think the most important thing is to give predictability and visibility on French pricing policy. So in the short term, the proposals are to manage to settle a conventional framework with the representatives of pharmaceutical industry to provide visibility and stability. The main measure we propose is a more predictable life cycle pricing model. It means that we give a more predictable and multi-annual pricing trajectory with predefined milestones for regulation discussions. In fact, it means price reductions most of the time along the period of market exclusivity. It's based on predefined criteria among their real expenditure compared to sales forecast, for example, or the entering of competitors with lower prices. There will be a stability period between two milestones. And if it's justified, the CEPS may accept premium prices at market entry for certain medicines under clear conditions. Of course, most innovative products and maybe also products production located in France or in Europe. But of course, we have to compensate these costs, these premiums. So regulation would intensify after patent expiry and in competitive markets. I also plead in this mission, in this report, for multi-annual savings targets, because for us it would help up in our task of regulation by allowing it to consider arrival of generics or biosimilars and of innovative therapies. Of course, when we have big generics which arrive on the market, it's easier for us to control the expenditure. We also have a proposal about the distribution market. I mean, we would like pharmacists to be less dependent on the volumes of products and on the prices of products, more paid by their role of health professional. Furthermore, I call for stronger European cooperation on pricing negotiation or at least pricing exchange of informations. And there is a beginning. Yesterday, we met a full a team of different country regulators. And I also plead for coordinating industrial investment incentives. I mean, industrial policy at a European level. We have a French industrial policy, but probably it would be more effective at a European level. Maybe I could raise some questions. Of course, we have to take into account this situation, the cost of R&D in the pharmaceutical industry, but I think we should wonder if the current model of pharmaceutical industry is still sustainable for a long time, as a permanent increase of expenditure in drugs is not sustainable for social security system with the aging population, chronic disease, and so on. And maybe I could also raise another question. Is there a link between high price expectations of industrial pharmaceutical company and outsourcing of R&D? And maybe there will be something that could help to manage this is the use of IA for R&D expenditure. Thank you.
Thank you. So that's interesting. So some of your questions, I think economists already have answers, but not for all of them. And I think it is clear from the literature that the expected revenue of the industry generates R&D, and so the level of price matters. It is not clear exactly whether it's the world revenue, the US revenue, European revenue, other countries' revenues, whether they matter in the same way. And there is some research going on this, which I think is quite important. But there is also some, so the link is clear. The magnitude is not so clear. There are different papers showing different magnitude of the impact. So that's interesting. So I take from you what you said, that the progress into the multi-year budgeting is, I think, from all economists' point of view, something very important. and could be helping the French system and many other countries. And I think also the European level answer, the more European level policy is quite important. So it's probably yet too early to think about health insurance at the European level, but that probably that would be the ideal, in fact, in a world where Europe would converge more rapidly. And I think there are more and more people talking about this and trying to find ways to implement such policy in the best interest of everybody, in fact. But maybe now it's useful to discuss also with you, Catherine, about first the first from the industry point of view, how difficult it is to deal with all these policies, of course, that are changing, and what consequences these policies can have, like the MFN policy, on decision of launch. And so maybe you can tell from your own experience.
Thank you. Hi, everyone, and thank you for the invitation. So let me start with a bit of context. The first thing I like to say, it's the MFN clause is holding up a mirror for us. And what we see in this mirror, I will say it's not really positive, because France seems to be not a performer in terms of access to innovation anymore. Not because we have a lack of talent or a lack of science, and we can see that here, but because our system does not encourage enough innovation to come in France. In the same way, for years, the France model worked well, and France was a real reference for science. Based in three pillars. The first one is universal access, and our system allows all the patients to obtain a treatment. The other one, and now it's perhaps a strike, it's a high volume, which compensate potentially relatively low price, and a stronger healthcare system, funding by public investment in hospital and care delivery. I really want to highlight that, because I think the different governments really invest in infrastructure, invest in public plan, and France was really positioning as a leader in oncology, in rare disease. So the model was really attractive for innovation. But now, and you mentioned that, the system has to face to a huge public deficit and stay under pressure. And today, the system has become too complex, too slow, and less attractive, to the point it's not longer sustainable in this current form. The facts are quite clear. If I see, of the 173 medicine approved in Europe between 2020 and 2023, only 103 are available in France. That means only 60% of new medicine are available in France, when you have 90% available in Germany. The patient wait for 633 days in France to access to medicine versus 158 days in Germany. And the clinical trials, France has dropped from the leading position to 4th place in Europe in the last decade. So seems to be that French patients wait longer and access less to innovation. This gap is now real, but we said that France still has major strengths, but these are now offset by structural weaknesses. This, and Pedro mentioned that, as real consequences, companies are making choices, and if returns are too low and the access too slow, launches are delayed or shifted to other countries. My concern, and I think we have to keep that in mind, without access, there are no clinical trials, which means less innovation for patients, less support for hospital and health ecosystem. And that, for me, it's really the virtuous cycle for science. The MFN clause amplifies this dynamic. And as Pierre mentioned, the debate is not new. The United States are really clear. They think they fund innovation, they take risks, and they pay at least 3 times more for medicine. In parallel, a significant part of production for innovative medicine remains located in Europe. If I take the example of Pfizer, more of 90% of our medicine sold in France are produced in Europe. So drug pricing in the US is really bipartisan, and these pressures are here to stay. But more broadly, and that is really my subject because we talk about MFN, but our issue is really the increasing of the global competition, and that is reshaping the landscape. The pharmaceutical industry is ongoing under profound transformation. As I mentioned, competition increasing, and the criteria for attractiveness are evolving rapidly. Investment are moving. I can mention also India and China is in particular is emerging as a major player. They invest a lot in science, in biotech, and they are really good and attractive now. So innovation is now global, and the context directly impacts us, and investment goes where rules are clear, timelines are fast, innovation is valued, and that is already happening. So in this context, what we should do, what we can do, and it's not about spending more, it's about spending better and acting faster. The proposal you put forward, Madame Beaumeunier, are really going in the right way, in the right direction. And I think that reflects exactly the international reality. We need to act on pricing, we need to act on regulation and organize innovation at the long-term investment, because innovation somewhere build and reinforce our healthcare system. We must think also at the European level. Europe together can have a real leverage. I would like to finish to say that France has all the assets, but today there is a clear gap between the ambition on one side we express in health and the signal sent to innovators. And that is really the core issue. Because finally, the question is not how much we spend, but do we want to stay in the race? Can we remain as a country competitive in this global innovation landscape?
Thank you. Thanks a lot. So that's very interesting to see from your point of view all the difficulties. And maybe Nicolas is going to add more, but I think we can. It's very interesting to see also the link between reimbursement pricing, access, and the R&D. It is true that for a long time we have overlooked this link, and from a European point of view or French point of view, the free riding position was very comfortable. So if you don't see the link, you could say, okay, fine, we don't care so much about having this anti-Alzheimer treatment now. We can wait, and so let's pay the richer countries. Let's have the richer countries like the US pay for all the R&D, and we will have access when it's a bit cheaper. The problem is that, as you mentioned, there starts to have a link also between the benefit of doing clinical trials in a local place and the reimbursement. And I think that's an interesting point. And we still want to have R&D in our country, in Europe. Not only because it's good for the patients that are in the trials now, it's good for the physicians who train, but also because it generates possible access in the future. So this is something which I think was not very well understood. So of course, there is still an international game played, and everybody does not want to pay too much for healthcare. But I think it's important to raise this link because it's important to be aware of it. And maybe, Nicolas, you can add more. And also, I know you want to say more on industrial policy also.
You're very right. And just starting with an anecdote, I think that there is a very good economist team named Dubois, Pierre, who's made some clarified the evidence between the link between clinical trial in a specific territory and the public health on a general point of view. So this is something which is obviously very difficult to evidence, but it is something extremely important with an indirect link, but very important between what we see in clinical trials and the effect on health, the effect on education on the different territories where those clinical trials are held. And here, what do we see when we look at Europe? We see very diverging points of view and policies. Germany recognizes clinical trials. Spain tries to make something with a global rating between industrial investment and clinical trial. Not necessarily a bad idea, honestly, but it's just a rating. You have 100 or 80 or 50 or something like that. In France, Madame Beaumeunier, you insisted in your mission that it could or should be taken into account. We were discussing it's difficult to make arbitration. I understand that between industrial rewards and clinical trial reward. But at the end, maybe that's first. The elephant in the room is probably the European level. Same thing for industrial investment. We looked at the new policies or the new political orientations from German government very recently. And what we see, honestly, I was quite surprised, is that Germany is trying to make something very comparable to France with the rewarding of industrial investment in Germany. And guys, I'm petrified, because if France rewards only industrial investment in France, Germany in Germany, Belgium in Belgium, etc., we, in my opinion, we missed really the reality of what is industrial investment in pharmaceutical industry. First, it is obviously the fragmentation of the industrial value chain. You make not one line buy products with everything, which is the chemistry sometimes, or the biological culture, then the filling, then the primary packaging, then the secondary packaging. It does not work this way. For specialization reasons throughout the different countries over Europe, or sometimes the qualification of the people, the logistic reasons, or in some specific cases, fiscal reasons, you fragment the value chain in industrial. So at the end, you cannot consider that if I make one piece of the product in France, another one in Germany, and another one in Belgium, I have only, the investment is not recognized as if it is really done over the European Union. Second point is that, of course, you lack the critical mass. We should have a market of, 500 million people. And of course, this should be rewarded at this stage, maybe not at the level of price of the US, we understand that. But of course, if you have a significant reward for a market of 500 million patients, of course, this matters, and this would have real consequences on the choices that could make a pharmaceutical company. Otherwise, but we are just building some windfall effect, some windfall gain, and it's really a pity since it is public investment. So at the end, and second time, the elephant in the room, in my opinion, is clearly the European level. And finally, and again, since I do believe as a European citizen that we need more Europe, that we see the debate right now in Europe regarding the Biotech Act 1 and 2. We consider that is absolutely essential to the future of our industry. And so very clearly, I hope that we will be able to embrace this issue at this level. Finally, I do understand that some people could be reluctant to transfer some competencies to the European level. But sorry, guys, when we look at federal countries, you can perfectly admit that there are two levels of reimbursement of cover. Look at Spain. It is very surprising for us French citizens to see that you could have in some comunidad autónoma the reimbursement for one product, and in another one, no reimbursement. If you look at Brazil, you have a federal level for reimbursement, but every state is absolutely free to decide to launch a protocol of reimbursement for a product, even if the 26 other states of the federation do not reimburse. So we should not be afraid of creating this additional level. It will not refrain our possibilities to diverge and to accept to reimburse if we want so, if we consider that a European cover is not enough. So again, my conclusion is really look at European level.
Thank you. That's a very good point. I think I agree almost 100% with what you said. And I think economists argue very often about the fact that Europe is a solution because the French population is too small. And I almost dream of seeing Mrs. Beaumeunier being the head of the European level CEPS. She would have a much easier work to do. Large population, and it would be much easier for her to negotiate prices for the European level population than just for France, while the Germans are doing their own negotiation, and it cannot work as well if you have each country doing that. So, as you said, Nicolas, maybe it's a little bit an utopia for now to think about European level healthcare and European level CPS. But I think we will be forced to go in this direction, and it's probably going to be a long way. And maybe Moritz, who is working at the European Commission, can tell us about what they're doing now and how difficult it is. But still, they make a lot of things. So maybe Moritz.
Thanks a lot for the invite, and thanks for having me here. It's fantastic to hear these pro-European visions, and I share absolutely many of these positive thoughts. So I'm not sure it will be easier to negotiate pharmaceutical prices at the European level, given the large differences in the organization of healthcare and the large differences in also the ability maybe to and the willingness maybe also to pay for certain medicines across Europe. But maybe before saying a few more words about the different policy initiatives at the European level, maybe coming back to and complementing Pedro's starting points, because what we see here when we look at the implementation of the most favored nation policy by the US administration, we actually not only see reference pricing as part of the strategy, but it's complemented by tariffs which are imposed on pharmaceuticals of up to 100%. It's currently implemented. It's the effect will be very different across countries. There will be lots of exemptions also on the per product basis, but it's clearly part of the MFN strategy. It's also US technology. Sorry. No, so it's implemented hand in hand with tariffs on pharmaceuticals, but it's also implemented hand in hand with deals, bilateral deals, 17 bilateral deals between the US administration and large leading pharmaceutical companies. Those companies cover roughly 80 to 85% of US revenues, and the deals exempt for these pharmaceutical policies from some these pharmaceutical companies from some or from all of the US policies on pharmaceuticals. The deals are confidential, so really nobody knows what's in the deals. But they, of course, impact launch strategies and pricing of companies, not only in the US, but also in Europe. Fourth strand that we see is that the US administration also approaches actually European and also non-European governments directly and requests an increase of pharmaceutical prices. We can see this, for example, there's a deal between the US and the UK that explicitly mentions tariffs, but also mentions pharmaceutical prices. So this is all a big mix and match of different policies from different areas, but all of them are affecting and targeting the pharmaceutical industry. And potentially all of these policies, they may have an effect on European patients. There are spillovers on the European industry and on European patients. And this is why, of course, the European Commission and also all of the member states pay very close attention to these policies, and in particular to the exact implementation of these policies, because here it really matters on how the policies are implemented, and the devil is in the detail. So as of now, what we see is a lot of policies are announced that leads to a lot of uncertainty in the pharmaceutical sector, in the pharmaceutical markets. And actually, I mean, we are economists here, so we are very much concerned with the causality of effects. What we see now, actually, none of the policies is implemented yet, but we already see an impact, which is not due to the policies, but due to the uncertainty induced in pharmaceutical markets due to the announcement of policies in the US. So we may see a launch delay in Europe, which is due to the announcement and not due to the policy. So we actually have to see and assess and monitor and understand and analyze how the policies will be implemented and what then will be the impact on the on Europe and then to potentially find a targeted response to these policies. I can just very briefly maybe give you an example also to complement what was said before. It's the reference pricing alone is implemented by 4 different policy actions: generous, globe, guard, and bilateral deals. Those affect Medicare, Part D and B, Medicaid, and a small share of direct-to-consumer sales. So I mean, it's a small share of the population in the US is actually affected, because when we think about so some of these policies are mandatory, some are voluntary. For some, the US states can opt in. For others, they can opt out or they cannot participate. So there's a different subset of the population. So for example, for the Medicare policies, there's only a test case for 25% of Medicare enrollees. So it's really a selected audience that is exposed to the reference pricing policies. Then when we look at the policies themselves, we see the reference basket actually differs for each of the policies. So there's one basket which is G7 plus Denmark and Switzerland, and there's another basket which includes how many? 25 countries, including 11, 20? 19, okay. Including 11 EU countries. So they have all different ways of calculating a reference price. One is the second lowest, the other one apparently an average, which is still confirmation here, it's good. But all of this, of course, has a different impact. I mean, depending on the methodology, there's a different impact on European consumers, on the launch strategy by the pharmaceutical industry, on the potential impact on Europe. So it's very, very, very important to get this right and to assess the policies correctly before finding possible policies that address potential problems here. And when we look at the toolbox that's available at the European level, so at the member states level, there are several policies available. For pricing, pharmaceutical pricing is actually not a competence of the European Commission. So we can do very little here. So that's with the member states, but we coordinate very closely. So we have regular calls with the industry, with the member states to discuss these issues, to coordinate on pricing, to find strategies, to find pricing and procurement strategies. Actually, right at this moment, there's a lunch of all the 27 EU health ministers in Luxembourg that actually discuss, guess what, MFN pricing. So it's a very timely event here, I would say. So when we look at the European policies, we have these policies that make Europe interesting for the pharmaceutical industry to bring products to Europe, to launch products in Europe. This is, for example, the Biotech Act, which was mentioned before. We propose that there's one additional year of basically patent protection for biomedicines that would make the EU market more attractive, maybe counter some of the effect from the MFN policies. But also for the reform of the pharmaceutical legislation, there are certain parts that modernize, that streamline, and make it easier and less costly to launch in Europe. And that gives an extra reward basically for truly innovative medicines against unmet medical needs, basically. There are policies that secure basically access and availability of medicines on the European market, on the EU market, which is mainly the Critical Medicines Act, but also other joint procurement. For example, the Joint Procurement Agreement is another one. But those foresee targeted investments in the pharma supply chain to make basically supply chains more robust, to avoid shortages in Europe, to increase access of European patients to medicines. Part of that is also the coordination of joint procurement of the member states. That then eventually, when we think about the economics of that would eventually amass buyer power then to make pharmaceutical industry interested to launch in a range of countries. It was mentioned just briefly before, well, by the speakers before, it was also mentioned the competitiveness of the European industry that concerns more, I would think, it concerns more the production side of and the manufacturing and the R&D of medicines, which is important industrial policy objective. Where there's a range of policies also supporting Europe's pharmaceutical industry. Again, the Biotech Act that amends basically the clinical trials regulation that makes it easier to conduct clinical trials in Europe, in different countries in Europe. The Biotech Act also improves funding for biotech medicines. There's a Biotech EU investment vehicle, which raises 10 billion euros, I think, in the next years for startups and scale-ups. In the pharma reform, there's a very interesting aspect that facilitates innovation, which is a regulatory sandbox, which is also something I think which is very much appreciated by the industry because it provides like a sandbox, a guarded environment for pharmaceutical firms to conduct research for innovative technologies, innovative medicines. And last but not least, there's the European Health Technology Assessment Regulation, which is basically about the harmonization and coordination of joint clinical assessments. So this is also a step which is important, not only for the industry, but also for the payers and the member states to coordinate the clinical assessments across Europe. So what we are seeing is a complex landscape and not a one policy fits all type, but we have different tools to target different problems here.
Thank you, Moritz. Very interesting. I think it's very important to think about Europe, and despite the fact that it's really interesting, because despite the fact that pricing of drugs and reimbursement is a national competency in most European countries, and to see all these policies like health technology assessment, the new pharma legislation happening at the European level, that's very encouraging also because it's probably not understood very well, but all these policies have some consequences on pricing, even if pricing is a national competency. So I think these are going in the good direction, and maybe it's because I'm not working within the European Commission, I'm more optimistic, but all this new legislation tell me that there is some hope that we go in this direction, like in industrial policy. Of course, devil is in the details, and maybe Jean is going to talk about that. Industrial policy is complex, the governance is difficult, etc. One thing I wanted to add is that maybe it's not perceived as well, but if you look at the pharma legislation that has been introduced recently, you have something within the legislation which we have worked on with Jean and Paul-Henri Moisson, which is a transferable exclusivity extension for financing new antibiotics. This is clearly going to affect the health insurance budget of each country because you're extending the exclusivity of some drugs that are going to purchase this exclusivity extension after the innovation happening. So it's a case where basically European countries have agreed in a way to have this common policy and to delegate some. And I'm hoping that all these policies are basically, if you could imagine an advanced market commitment at the level of Europe, or some reward mechanism, like as you said, we are going to have also to avoid shortages, something at the European level to that the industry, the innovators are getting, in the exchange of a promise to give access to all European countries, and then each country just have to pay the marginal cost in a way. So if you look in this, if you go in this direction, you have no more problem of national competency being an issue, because basically the R&D part of the pricing is going to be paid at the European level, and then the national countries will just decide whether they are able to reimburse the marginal cost. But maybe we can talk more about this in the discussion before, after Jean tells us what he thinks, and then we will have questions from. I'm sure there are many questions from you. Some of you here in the audience have worked on this topic. So, Jean.
Well, thank you. I'll be discussing industrial policy a little bit, but before that, let me say a couple of words about MFNs. It's quite natural that we have different prices in different countries, different incomes, different institutions, different sizes. You know, big countries have lower prices in Europe and different local pathologies and so on. It's a subtle form, MFNs are subtle forms of extraterritoriality. And it's a very interesting one. Pedro actually talked about the trickling down or the cascade. You said the cascade of a very rich country, basically comparing to rich countries and comparing to low and middle income countries and so on. Actually, it's even more complicated than that. There is a publication, and I'm going to show you from here. One of you in the back of this room will have written this and will notice this matrix here, incredibly complex matrix in Europe. If you can see it, Luca Maini has actually has written it. So nobody has ever solved actually this exact issue about how you form prices and the like. I mean, the generalized Nash bargaining solution is still missing, I believe. But, you know, there are lots of interesting aspects to it. For one thing, and that has been mentioned many times, it's not a zero-one decision. It's not like France is going to have the molecule or not. Actually, the thing is more that France will have the molecule with a delay. And you know, the question is why? I mean, even that we don't know why, because it could be 0-1. I have it or I don't have it. And, you know, for us economists, we should be actually, you know, if you're looking for a paper to write, look at basically, you know, why is that, you know, actually the inefficiency come from a delay rather than just non-consumption? Is that the Gaussian durable good monopolies? And if so, will you make a difference between some recurrent treatment, which you have to take every month or every year, and a one-shot treatment, which is going to become more and more prevalent with targeted therapies? You know, it should not give you the same result at all in terms of the delay. So there are lots of things to be done in terms of the research. But of course, there is an inefficiency coming from basically some uniformization of prices across countries. And we know that from parallel trade in Europe, we have the same issue. In principle, you want to price discriminate depending on the country. So let me say a few words about industrial policies. And first, I don't know what industrial policy is, because there are many notions of industrial policies. it's not only the instruments, and there are many instruments for that, but it's also what you are trying to do in the first place. So are you just trying to procure molecules which already exist? I mean, that's what Sweden does with antibiotics. It's spending the money to make sure that they have access to the molecules. They're not encouraging innovation in that way. And then there is the innovation part, trying to develop new molecules. And those are very different concepts, I think. And I will return to that. So on the procurement thing, there's, of course, all this talk about reshoring. And again, not that many studies about whether it's really necessary, whether you want to have long-term contracts instead, which is what Sweden does with antibiotics, supply diversification, stockpiling. I mean, when I see that France is pushing for paracetamol, I'm a little bit nervous. I'm totally incompetent, but I'm a little bit nervous, to be honest, that the future of France will be paracetamol. I should not say that because one of the factories will be in Toulouse, so I may have to leave the city and the country as well. I'm more interested in the innovation part. Actually, the innovation part, I will come back to that, is more of a public good than the procurement part, which is trying to grab access to private goods. I mean, it's more complicated than that, of course. A couple of years ago, I wrote a report with some people from Italy and Germany about what we call the mid-tech trap. It's amazing how the US has specialized in high tech. And we in Europe, we are specialized in mid-tech, which explains in large part actually the huge difference in R&D spending between the two countries. 1/3 of the money in Europe, private money goes, R&D budget goes to the automobile sector. And when you see what the European automobiles are, you start being nervous, right? 1/2 actually goes to mid-tech. It's 85% in the US, which goes to biotech and tech. And John has written on that. And, it's a huge difference. And in the report, we look at Horizon Europe, which is a bigger program. And actually, very, very small fraction, actually, of that money, which was supposed to be the new DARPA, in a sense, very, very small fraction, 5% was going to high tech. I mean, it's just amazing. So. And then we're, of course, handicapped by governance, and I could spend hours trying to tell you why it's going wrong with the just return thing, with the spreading of money across many countries and many firms. The unanimity rule in Europe, which is, of course, very difficult. It's as if Nebraska chose the NIH, the level of the NIH, NSF, and NASA budget. I mean, you know what will happen then? It makes no sense. So there is this innovation, and then there is a reshoring, and you can mix the two as well, actually. So there was this mention of a contract which will tie reward to R&D national content in France. So that the R&D better. And maybe that will be a question for Virginie. And, how are you going to do that? I'm very interested in knowing. By the way, I'm not against it on theoretical grounds. Innovation is a global public good. And, if France get a little reward from it, that's all right with me. I'm very much against protectionism, but it's a case where I'm not against it, actually, because we supply a global public good. By the way, I will not say the same thing for procurement, which is not a global public good. So I'm talking about innovation here. It's very important. But then how are you going to do it? How are you going to measure the R&D content? So, for example, Sanofi, there are lots of important R&D done by Genzyme. Is that French? Probably not. At the same time, it's very important that Sanofi is doing those things. What does higher prices mean? It's a negotiation. So how do you commit to higher prices? How do you do it? And all those things. So it's not an answer at all. It's a question for Virginie, but for all of you. what's going to happen, right? I mean, I'll be very curious about this. There's no formula, X percent of R&D in the country gives you Y% higher prices. No, that doesn't exist. So that will be very interesting to see what happens. And of course, there's a usual thing about what the price means, given that it's usually a multidimensional thing. It's not only a price. So that's interesting. So maybe I should stop here. But more questions than answers, I'm afraid.
Thank you, Jean. So yeah, more questions than answers, but we will try to have answers, and we will try to maybe raise even more questions. So we can have any of you speaking if you want to add something, but maybe we can also take questions from the room here, from the audience. I'm sure there are a lot of questions. So if you want to ask something, just raise your hand. And then you will pass the microphone. And
Thank you very much. Maybe a question to any of you, but maybe directed to DG Santé, maybe. I would be very interested in knowing how you foresee the Made in Europe for biotechnology. While the text is under review, is not even published, so it's probably not possible for you to say everything, but just for your being interested in having your perspective on how such mechanism of having a kind of made in Europe incentive or criteria could really shape the future of Europe for innovation.
Yeah, very good question. Thanks. Yeah, indeed, about the Made in EU Industrial Accelerator Act, I cannot say much. So the proposal for the Biotech Act, for example, they also, I mean, there's a proposal to extend the statutory patent, so the SPC extension. So that's a proposal, and there are discussions also to link this to specific conditions as to conduct research in Europe. This is very much mirroring a provision which is already in the general pharma legislation, which gives extra protection, an extra protection period to companies that conduct clinical trials in Europe. So it's on the agenda to also have R&D in Europe, to keep R&D in Europe, and to support R&D.
Thank you, Moritz. Any other question? So if there is no other question, maybe if some of you wants to react to the different discussions, if Nicolas, Pedro, maybe first, you were the first to talk.
Yeah, I can go again. Because one of the important themes on this is that we want to improve research in Europe, fine, but research depends a lot on the revenues, and half of the revenues of major companies come from the United States, and so I think that cannot forget that. So anything that we do on pricing in Europe will have to, in revenues, will have to deal with that part. And what will be my best guess for the near future on this is that companies and the countries will try to go around the MFN external referencing as the way they have did in Europe with external reference pricing in general. So what I can guess that may be happening is that we're going to see more of those pricing mechanisms that kind of create opacity between list prices and net prices. Things like subscription models, the Netflix model. You pay a fixed amount per year and usage is determined by need. What is the net price there? If you have payback mechanisms, if total expenditure exceeds a certain amount, you give back some money. How do you distribute that according to the different products to have a net price? If you have performance-based, and performance-based is measured 2 years after the product is administered to see whether you have the net price after 2 years. How is that going to be used in this process? I think all of these things that we've been holding back sometimes in some agencies will appear, discounts according to volume. So everything that's going to create opacity is probably the first line of change that we're going to see. And I can say that from my side, okay? Maybe the people from the industry do not agree, but in 2 years, we'll check on this conference whether that is happening or not. The other thing that is going to change, it's going to, and we should monitor that, is going to be on clinical trials. Clinical trials are the way to define which populations are targeted by the drugs. Now, if you have a widely applicable new drug, but has a low cost effectiveness in that population in Europe, but if you narrow down that to 10% of that population, and then suddenly you have a high ratio of a low cost for effectiveness, so you can command a high price in Europe, companies will get that high price just because of the United States market, if it is a reference price. So you're going to start seeing changing and narrowing the clinical trials to cases in which you can show high effectiveness so that you can have a high price. And that will lead to situations where we have patients out without even noticing that they are out because you don't do the clinical trials for them in the first place. And that's probably something that we can monitor over the next 2 years or 3 years because clinical trials have to be registered so we can observe that. And that's probably the second line of change that I would expect to see. It's not going to be immediate. Clinical trials are already going, but the new ones, I'm pretty sure that will react to this new environment. Well, pretty sure. As much as I can be, but let's put this. This is an hypothesis of work that we should check empirically in the future whether there is causal effects.
So I agree with you, Pedro. There are already some papers showing the link between revenue and clinical trials. So clearly, the type of clinical trials is going to be affected by this policy. It's a subtle effect which you raised. And I think it's a very interesting one. Yeah, this needs to be checked for by maybe some students or researchers here who want to study this in the future. We still have 10 minutes, so Nicolas?
Yeah, I just wanted to stress one point of Professor Tirole was mentioning about the possibility of just a delay in the launches of the product. And I'm quite afraid of that because if we start to say, okay, we will not launch this product and we will wait for the arrival of the generics and the biosimilars. But that the sales for instance, in France or in Germany are zero. I'm very afraid that they will not launch as well. Because if you look at what happens between the launch of a pharmaceutical product and the arrival after the patent expiries of copies, you have an enormous work of education of the prescribers, which is done by the pharmaceutical companies, which will definitively select between the good products and the bad products. We have good surprises and bad surprises versus the clinical trials that give you only a reasonable certainty, but not the absolute certainty of the quality of the product. You have all the protocols that are based and that are built by the professionals in association with this product. It works in association with that. It does not work. The selection of the patients for this kind of patient, very efficient, for the other, not at all, etc., etc. If you do not make this work, I'm sorry, but the generic companies will not make that because it is not their job, very, very simply. So I think that one of the solutions, because I understand, I fully understand your point of view, Mrs. Beaumeunier. It is not possible to ask for French CEPS, French authorities, German authorities to reimburse each and every drug. It's not possible. In this context, we have to be reasonable, especially if we ask for very high prices. So one of the solutions, I just take my Brazilian example, is that if you multiply the levels of reimbursement in Brazil, it is municipality, state, federal level, private market, you multiply the possibilities of certain population to have access to your drugs. At least you can launch the product. You can see whether it works or not. And you can have this kind of, I would say, oil effect on other channels when it works really great and when the price starts to erode. I'm not sure we will find an agreement on that, but honestly, it could be one of the solutions for me.
Virginie?
Maybe I can add about that. Well, I don't think it's politically acceptable in France for the moment, because in France, equality is something very important. But we have tried to do something like that with obesity drugs, because we have restricted prescriptions only on the people we have the biggest obesity. But I'm very concerned about that, because we have big pressure from practitioners to extend the prescription rights. So I'm not sure we'll be able to monitor this, but anyway, we will lower the price if we extend the practitioners' prescriptions. I just want to mention something about delays and about the arriving of drugs in France. You mentioned, Mrs. Raynaud, about 60% of products only arriving in France. It's not really, I don't agree exactly with this figure, because 40% of the products which did not arrive in France, most of them, and a large, really most of them, are products with no therapeutics benefits. And even the firms don't even apply for reimbursement and pricing in France. So we have to be careful about that. For the moment, we don't really see an effect of MFN policy. The only effect is due, as Moritz said, to uncertainty. I can admit that it's difficult for companies to see what will happen in the United States and then in Europe. But we still have agreement with for innovative products in France. We are the first country to reimburse in the EU obesity drugs. So that's something, that's a signal, that's something important, even if I'm concerned about that. But anyway, we still have agreement, and we want to go on to streamline, to modernize our policy.
Thank you. Yeah, it is interesting to. Yesterday was the first day where this GLP-1 anti-obesity drugs were reimbursed in France. So, of course, for the very obese people with some medical conditions, so it's going to cost some money for sure. But I think from the point of view of obese people, it's a good decision. There are a lot of studies showing the benefit of those treatments. Whether it's going to make the budget in deficit even more, maybe in the short run, but we will see. I don't think it's a bad decision, even if it's costly. But as you said, a lot of these considerations are also political decisions. It's not necessarily your job to determine the healthcare budget in France. It's a political decision, and that's the current system, which I don't think is good, but that's what it is. Moritz. Jakub has a question then.
Okay, sorry. No,
Go ahead.
Because I also would just have a question coming back to a topic we touched earlier upon, which is the location of production of pharmaceutical firms. Because it's just a curiosity which I really never understood, which is, so there were, for example, recently there was an announcement that Eli Lilly and I think Boehringer Ingelheim, they announced huge investment in pharma manufacturing in Germany. They did that a year ago, or I don't know when. So recently, they scrapped all of these investments by saying, look, Germany is not paying higher prices for pharmaceuticals anymore. So therefore, we have to scrap our decision to manufacture in Germany. So this is, from my basic economic understanding, those are maybe two different optimization problems. One is where to and how to produce, and the other one is where and how to sell. But maybe that seems to be not the case in the pharmaceutical industry. Maybe somebody can help me to understand this a bit better.
Hi, I'm Jakub Hlavka from Maastricht University and also USC in California, so kind of having a US-European perspective. I'm always struggling with this idea of companies moving mostly to the US while profits and revenues are concentrated there. The pie will simply shrink, and with Europe aging faster than the US, the demand seems to be increasing for chronic treatment. So just curious what the implications for the global pie, the size of the pie really are of this reaction, and whether Europe actually is not undermining its own negotiating power by just kind of not coordinating. And it seems like Europe should not be reacting to the US and its trade policies, but really being on par, if not even more important in future negotiations with the US. And maybe I'm looking at the EU representative here, because I still don't see Europe taking strong enough steps. And I also don't understand how companies would manage to keep their market power or manage their revenues without Europe. In a way, I feel like the pie is really shrinking. And somehow there's something missing, and I'm not sure if it's just strategic ambiguity with respect to very unpredictable US policies, where Europe is basically holding back and hoping that internal domestic politics kind of takes over. And I have seen many, conservative economists in the US criticizing MFN. It's not like there's universal agreement on this. So are we just waiting for the midterms and then we'll respond, or are we giving up our European position in the negotiations?
Well, that's quite a tricky question to answer. But I mean, so first of all, I'm really pricing. So MFN is partly about reference pricing. So it's really about prices. And here, we as a commission, we cannot do anything. We don't have a budget to buy any pharmaceuticals. We don't have a competence. We're just not allowed. But as mentioned before, we can indeed coordinate and so on. The question is not so much reacting emotionally to policies that are imposed on us by a third country. So it's more to assess what is the potential implications for EU patients and for EU industries. And this, I cannot speak for any political level, but our work is for sure not affected by the midterms or hold it back. I mean, we are not holding back until so we are preparing. And if it turns out that there's a problem with access to innovative medicines, or a problem that the pharmaceutical industry disappears from Europe, for sure there will be policy initiatives also coming back. And this is maybe one of the flaws of this specific European democratic process. It takes time sometimes, and I share maybe the disappointment that sometimes it's a bit slow, or it can be perceived as slow. But that's how the process is, and it's a consensus-based European, it's a European project.
Thank you, Moritz. Any other remark before we finish and close? Virginie, maybe?
Just a final remark. I think that Trump MFN policy could be a lose-lose policy, because we could have a loss for European countries if we have to pay more, or if we are deprived from some innovations. But we didn't speak about China. And China is a big issue for Europe, but also for the US. And so the American firms, if Chinese firms increase their market share, could suffer also from the MFN policy. So we have to be very careful about what China will do in Europe, because it gives competition. And we already see a Chinese firm coming with very competitive drugs, very effective, and also with very low price.
Thank you. I think we are reaching the end of this roundtable. So unless there is an urgent question, we can have more conversation during breaks. I think, but to conclude, I think we raised a lot of very interesting points, a lot of questions, of course, probably a lot of ideas for future research for everybody here in the room. I think we try to do here at the Health Center at TSC, we try to focus on all these policy questions, try to have some research that is policy relevant, that makes sense, and I'm very happy of these roundtables because it's going to feed even more our discussions and trying to help us design maybe more ideas, more policies, and hopefully for the common good, as Jean would say. So thanks a lot for everybody, and thanks for the roundtable speakers.